All right, well, it's time for another edition of Campaign Catch-Up. Yes, we are still doing Campaign Catch-Up. I know the campaign is over, but we have a lot going on here, and we're going to keep doing this up until, I think, Inauguration Day. And then it'll be into a different mode here once the transition happens and President-elect Trump is into his actual term in its first 100 days. But the building is happening now, the building of the team, the cabinet picks, and John Stolnis is here, host of CBN's DC Debrief Podcast, to help break it all down. John, how's it going?
Man, I thought we were going to get a little bit of a breather after the election was over, but no, sir. No, sir. Yeah. The train is on the tracks and we are still hurtling towards the brick wall. So here we go. Yeah.
It's fast and furious. And I mean, Trump met with Biden. That was interesting in and of itself before we get into all these cabinet picks here. I thought that was interesting. It, showing some kind of what we used to see back in the day, right? When the president-elect would come in, you'd have this hard-fought campaign, and then they do it. And, given the rhetoric that they threw at each other, the things that Trump said about Biden and his age, and I mean, Trump softened a little bit once Biden was out. He kind of would make cracks about wanting Biden back in there, and he missed Biden, but he said some harsh things, and likewise, so did Biden. Biden called Trump essentially a threat to democracy, and then they're just sitting there hanging out like old pals. So, but in a way, that's kind of like a familiar thing, and it's, somewhat of a good thing to see, I think.
It is a good thing. I mean, if you want to have confidence in the balance of power, the peaceful transfer of power, this is always something that the outgoing administration has to do with the new incoming administration. I mean, you shouldn't be selfish and deprive the country of continuing to move forward on things by not partaking in a smooth transition. And so that's what we're seeing here. And that's what we've seen just about every other outgoing presidential administration do for the incoming presidential administration. And that's what we saw at the White House this week. There can be no more uncomfortable a political moment that any politician will ever have than if you're a sitting president, you just got kicked out of office and you have to sit in the Oval Office and shake hands and welcome the person who just ousted you, who spent the last 2 years ripping you to shreds. I mean, this happens every time. There can't be a more uncomfortable thing for any president to ever have to do than to sit there for that photo op. But it's necessary, and it's something that really has to happen and should happen every single time a president is leaving power. And I hope everybody hears that. It should happen every single time.
Yeah. And I will say I did appreciate the joke of, because look, a lot of people felt Biden was pushed out and maybe he was unhappy about it. And so when the picture of Biden and Trump came out, it said like, hey, look, President-elect Trump with one of his supporters, joking that, which I'm pretty sure he probably voted for Kamala. I'm not going to, but it was a funny joke nonetheless. But anyway.
Yeah. Funny's funny.
Yeah, let's go through some of these. Let's go through some of the picks here, because there's some that have been causing a lot of conversation, and it's certainly interesting. I want to start, John. Let's start with, I think, the biggest splash. I mean, there's a lot of big splashes, but I think this Department of Government Efficiency with Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy. Mm-hmm. This is interesting because, in the past, conservatives, a lot of times Republicans would come in promising to lower the size of government, and then, the national debt proceeds to balloon no matter who's in the office, right? So this feels like, and it's intentionally an outsider thing, right? Not somebody in a government position. It's just supposed to be, and I don't know how it'll end up being structured, but with somebody like Elon Musk, Vivek Ramaswamy, obviously two great business people. I mean, they've had incredible careers. Is this all just sort of a dog and pony show, or are we going to actually see maybe some serious change ahead for as far as government spending goes?
Well, I will mention this thing that Democratic Senator Elizabeth Warren said, and she noted that it is interesting that you have two people who are heading a government efficiency department. So maybe not the most efficient way, but I think part of the argument that of it being not so efficient is, what is going to be the power sharing structure here between these two guys? I mean, which will Elon Musk have one part of the government that he's looking at, and Vivek Ramaswamy have another part of the government? We don't really know. They may not even really know exactly what shape it's going to take. But I think in listening to some of what Ramaswamy has said about this over the last couple of weeks, he has referred to what it is that they're planning on doing as the second great purge. Like we're talking about the mass deportation of immigrants, illegal immigrants that Donald Trump wants to undertake. Ramaswamy has called what he and Elon Musk are going to be doing maybe the second great deportation, and that's the deportation of these federal workers who were not elected, but who continue to stay there, and what they say is to practice partisan politics in nonpartisan governmental roles over multiple administrations. And so they obviously are going to be targeting a lot of these people who are in charge of making policy but are not elected. And there's a lot of people in Northern Virginia that I know are nervous about this. A lot of government employees, a lot of federal contractors, some people that I'm friends with and family members that I know who are concerned about what that's going to mean for their jobs and for their future. But Donald Trump's goal is to simplify, streamline, make the government simpler, make it less of a Titanic-sized ship that you have to maneuver, to make it more nimble to meet modern needs and budgets and whatnot. And I don't think any of us have any idea what shape this is going to take.
Yeah, and like as much what authority will they have other than like making recommendations and things like that? But one thing that Elon said, and then we can move on from this. Once you get your reaction to this, but because my experience, at least from people that I know that work in the government sector, there's this tendency to have. They actually said, the one anecdote they said was their boss told them that they had to spend. They had an X amount, millions of dollars in their budget, and they were short on this. They hadn't spent that, and they were just told to just spend it on whatever, because if they didn't spend it, they wouldn't get that same budget for the next year. And like, it just seems like and I would assume that's probably similar in a lot of places. And it's like, if your incentive is to just make sure you get your budget, well, that's going to incentivize wasteful spending. And so and Elon kind of targeted this mindset and said, there needs to be incentives for actually coming in under budget and being more efficient. And so it seems like at times you need somebody outside of the government to kind of give that sort of perspective, because that is one, I think, blind spot for a lot of government workers or like at least offices, is this, there's no pressure for, okay, if we make this choice, we're going to lose revenue, right? Like you can always just say, oh, we're short. Well, let's just pitch for some higher taxes, right? Like, so sometimes that incentive can't be there. So I find that part is particularly intriguing to me, because I do think it's an area our government could use some improvement, obviously.
Right, and then that's something we always hear about too on a state level. Road work, they've got to schedule a certain amount of repairs done on roads. They got to spend all their budget so that they can get the same amount next year. It's the same no matter where you are with this kind of money and this kind of work that's being done. But I think you hit the point of what is the incentive. Like I like what Elon Musk says about that. I think that's a good thing to try and figure out. How can you encourage people to come in under their budget? But generally speaking, incentives are based around money. And so, I mean, I guess you could say, like, if you do come in under budget, you'll get double the amount you come under budget the next year. But, maybe that saves you money in this year, but it increases the amount of money you'd spend in the next fiscal year. I'm sure smarter people than I might have some ideas on how to make that work, but structuring the incentive in that particular example that you mentioned would be interesting.
Yeah, and like you said, and also too, like they better actually be efficient, because if the government, Department of Efficiency isn't efficient, that's going to lend itself to some more jokes. But But all right, let's run down some of these, John. Okay, so we have let's start with Marco Rubio, Secretary of State. That pick.
The consensus is, and I heard Elizabeth Warren talking about this on MSNBC this morning. I don't think, let's just be honest, that all of these picks, I would imagine there's not a single Democrat that will support any of them, because they're going to push Donald Trump's vision for all of these different offices that they're going to hold. And they are not shared by pretty much every Democrat in Congress and every Democrat in the Senate. But she was talking about Marco Rubio and saying, we may not agree on policy and I may not vote for him, but he's qualified for the job. He has been in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. He's been a member of the Gang of Eight, which is the 8 members of the Senate who are clued in first anytime there's a national security issue. So if you want to have somebody who knows many of the other heads of state and is certainly aware of the the international political stage, it's Marco Rubio. And so I think that is a pick that even that mainstream Republicans, MAGA Republicans, every Republican seems to be on board with Marco Rubio as Secretary of State. And I think if you gave some of the Democrats in the Senate some truth serum, they might say, yeah, this is about as good a pick as we could have ever expected from Donald Trump to make for this particular post.
All right, let's move over to Secretary of Defense. This one got a lot of conversation. It's Pete Hegseth, who's an Ivy League grad, a combat veteran, and so has done a lot of work with the military. And, a lot of the critique says, well, he's a TV host on Fox News. And so, yes, he is that. And no, not necessarily somebody who you would expect to be the pick, but he does have a lot of related experience. What are you hearing on this one?
Well, I mean, he's done some work for veterans, for the military. He certainly is a decorated veteran himself, and so he understands the military. I think the wariness that some have, including some non-MAGA Republicans. I know it was Senator Todd Young, who's not a big Trump booster, but certainly is not anti-Trump in the way that Mitt Romney is, said basically, I don't know him. What is his vision for what he would want the Pentagon? Because we're talking about reform of the Pentagon, and that's what Donald Trump has said he wants. He wants there to be a review board for existing generals I think with the idea of moving out some of the generals that are there and promoting different people into these different roles, maybe with the idea of kind of being more in line with Donald Trump's thinking on foreign policy. And Pete Hegseth, as the guy who's in charge of the Pentagon, would be really at the front of that. He would be spearheading that. So the question is, the fact that he's never worked at the Pentagon or that he's never had a Pentagon job, doesn't really know the inner workings of the Pentagon, does that make him the best choice for this position? Clearly, Donald Trump and Pete Hegseth, this is somebody that he knows and he trusts. But does he have the question is, does he have the policy experience and the Pentagon experience to do what Donald Trump eventually would want him to do? Remember, 27,000 people work at the Pentagon. It is the largest office building in the country and one of the largest in the world. So as he's taking on this monumental task of restructuring the Pentagon, who is he going to have underneath him that hopefully knows the infrastructure of the Pentagon that can help him to carry out whatever it is Donald Trump wants to do? And does he have the skills and the leadership ability to outmaneuver a lot of these generals, a lot of these upper echelon Pentagon folks who know the bureaucracy, who know the inner workings of the Pentagon? Will he be able to do his job effectively? I think that's a question that a lot of senators, especially some maybe Republicans, especially who are on the fence, would want to hear from him in any kind of nomination hearing.
Yeah, I would imagine whatever team he puts around him is going to be critical on that. If he just recognizes any gaps in knowledge he has in that area, that maybe they'll try to fill them that way. All right, I know there's a whole bunch to get through, John. Let's list some names here, and let's see which one you want to zero in. We got Mike Huckabee, ambassador to Israel. A lot of conservatives applauded that pick. Matt Gaetz, Attorney General, is probably the most controversial pick so far. So let's get some reaction to that one.
Well, I think what we're hearing even from a lot of the Republican senators is shock that Matt Gaetz was selected for this position. And it was a very strongly worded email and statement from the Liberty Council out here on Thursday. They're headed by a man named Matt Staber. This is one of the foremost Christian legal groups in the country, and they flat out say they said he is not fit to be Attorney General. And I'll read you just a little bit of what they wrote. They said, morally, Gaetz has been under a cloud of sex and drug allegations. On Wednesday, as soon as he was tapped by President-elect Donald Trump, Gaetz immediately resigned from Congress, thus ending the ethics probe into his sex parties that includes allegations of paying an underage girl for sex. He will face tough questions during any confirmation hearing and will likely not be confirmed. They're urging him to withdraw his name from the nomination proceeding. And so you have here a guy who is... Hugh Hewitt, who's a conservative commentator and radio host, essentially was speculating that this may be Donald Trump's way or Donald Trump's team's way of moving Gates just out of the picture entirely. Put him in the spotlight here. All of this negative media attention that he's getting, these Republican senators who are coming out and expressing shock and some of them flat out saying, we won't confirm him. If it seems like it's an impossible road, he's not going to be, they will revoke his name from consideration from nomination when the new Congress comes in. I personally, given the way things are reading right now, I don't think it happens.
You don't think he gets revoked? I
don't think he ever comes up for nomination. I think he will withdraw his name from nomination.
Well, and that's interesting because that'll be interesting to see if that does play out, because the timing of this is, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but because it's unusual for somebody to resign from Congress like this quickly, right? After a nomination to a post. And it happened like 2 days before this probe or these, this investigation would come up. And so he thus avoids it by doing this. So if he then doesn't get nominated, I think to what you're saying, if I'm understanding it correctly, is they essentially, for being a supporter of Trump and for being a loyalist to Trump, the Trump team's repayment for that is to give him a graceful way to avoid this whole investigation, to be able to just say, all right, well, I'm going to bow out of this, this nomination for AG. So do we have any idea? Like, I mean, we're like 5 steps ahead on this, but is there a thought as to who would it be if it wasn't him?
I think I don't know what the other short list would be for Attorney General off the top of my head. I've seen some names and none of them are popping to mind right now. But certainly folks who are have just more experience in terms of being a law enforcement background. I mean, and Congressman Gates just doesn't really have any of that either, outside of his own legal troubles that he's had. So I think there are candidates who are qualified. I wish I had the names in front of me. I don't at the moment.
That's all right. It's all good. And John, look, there's a lot, and we'll talk next week more on some of these names and whatever else happens between now and then. But I mean, Tulsi Gabbard, a lot of conversation there. Kristi Noem, I don't think it's any surprise that she got a position given her vocal support for Trump. That was another one. Elise Stefanik, ambassador to the UN. Interesting too that Trump went out of his way to mention Nikki Haley and say that, hey, thanks for your service last time, but we're not going in that direction this time. So Tom Homan, the border czar. So a lot of names, a lot of things happening right now. I'll give you one last crack at it, John. Anybody you wanted to respond to, we didn't get to any of the names I just mentioned or haven't mentioned before we head out.
Yeah, I'll give you 2 rapid fire thoughts. The first on Tulsi Gabbard. There is some reluctance among Republican circles about her as well. I mean, she certainly has a lot of foreign policy experience, but there's concerns over some things that she had shared on social media that came straight from Russian propaganda. So there is this sense by Democrats especially that she is in the pocket of the Russian government and President Putin. And so there's some weariness. I keep saying weariness. There's some wariness that giving her exposure to all some of our country's deepest secrets they'd be putting them in hands that are not the best. But she's been very strong in support of Israel. She actually denounced the killing by Donald Trump's administration of the former head of the Iranian National Guard, Soleimani. So she's kind of had some different thoughts, both pro and con stuff that the Trump administration did. And then the Kristi Noem thing I think is interesting, and that is the Department of Homeland Security Secretary. Because you have Tom Homan and because you have Stephen Miller, who are really going to be heading this mass immigration deportation, and really the White House is going to be running immigration policy, she will more oversee FEMA, the TSA, cybersecurity. That has been a big part of her what she's done as North Dakota governor, is really focusing in on cybersecurity and what that means for America's security moving forward.
All right, John Stolnis, host of the DC Debrief Podcast. As always, appreciate it, and we'll keep on doing this until Inauguration Day. So we'll look forward to doing it again next week.
Until they make us stop, Dan.
Right.